Cue the music on a great Monday morning. We've got great weather, talking about a great Eagles performance yesterday. I think we have a great show, certainly a great co-host and guest. The host, I'll leave it up to you to decide, but want to welcome everybody to the Bird Brains with Ken and Mark. My partner is the longtime Eagles beat writer for the Trenton Times and NJ.com, Mark Eckel. I'm ex-Philadelphia Eagles, Philadelphia Stars tight end Ken Dunek, and we have a special guest today that I'm going to introduce in just 1 minute. Before we get started with the show, a couple of housekeeping items. This podcast is sponsored by Gateway Mortgage. Chris Wilhelm, great Eagles fan, JerseyMan magazine member, runs that organization. His number is 856-810-1222. He can handle all of your mortgage needs, whether it's a refi or a new purchase. Call Chris Wilhelm at Gateway Mortgage, 856-810-1222. I also want to mention that this podcast is being recorded at the Sweet Recording Studios in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Go to sweetrecording.com, ask for Joe Gangemi, and he can set you up with your own podcast. And finally, JerseyMan Magazine has their event of the year coming up on November 7th, which is a Thursday. We've got our Unmasking Gala, where we honor 6 Man and Women of the Year candidates and give some money to their respective charities. If you can make that event, there'll be 400 to 500 people there. It's an awesome event with great food, open bar for 4 hours, silent auction items, and it's a really fun night. Go to JerseyManMagazine.com for more information. And then finally, the Eagles are doing a cruise this year, Ray. I don't know if you heard about this, but on April 12th, Vince Papale, Sean Ladetta, myself, Byron Evans, Gary Cobb, and other Eagles will be taking off from Tampa, Florida on an Eagles cruise, and it's going to go to Honduras and some other ports of call down in that area. If you're interested, Joe, I know is going to put a screenshot up there, give you some information on the Eagles cruise. So let's talk about what I think was possibly the best Eagles performance of the year. I understand it's against the Giants. And I understand it's against 2 weeks in a row. We've played some rather weak teams, but the Eagles played well. You can only play who's on your schedule. At this point, I want to bring in our special guest. This is a guy who I've been very friendly with for my entire time here in Philadelphia. He's the Dean of Philadelphia Sports Journalists, graduated from Temple in 1968, started covering the Eagles in 1969, which puts him at 55 years of service. At this point, I want to bring in my good friend, Ray Didinger. Ray, how are you?
I'm great, Ken. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and it's always a pleasure to see my old friend, Mark Eckel.
Awesome. Look at all those Emmys behind him. Isn't that impressive, Mark? I mean, listen, that's some good stuff. And, of course, you see my co-host there, Mark Eckel. Mark, I know you're living the good life in North Myrtle Beach, but did you see the game? And if you did, what'd you think of it?
It kind of went the way I thought the last two would go. Remember when they were 2-2 and everybody was panicking, and I said, "Listen, they got 2 cupcakes the next 2 weeks. They're going to kill the Browns. They're going to kill the Giants." Well, they didn't kill the Browns. So going into the game, I was a little all right. If they play the way if they play up to their potential, there's no way the Giants are going to stay with them. The Giants can't score points, and they did. This was, although they didn't score in the first quarter again. I mean, I don't want to be the nitpicker, but it would be nice to score a first quarter point before the year.
Come on, we got to talk about something. We got to complain about something. We're Philadelphia.
We got to have something bad to say right now. No, it was a great. I mean, Barkley. You kind of knew Barkley was going to have a big game, and he did. The defense, would they have like 8 sacks?
8 sacks, yeah.
And that's pretty good. So I mean, yeah, it was by far their best overall game of the season. And now we'll see where they go from here. And as far as I know, Nick didn't yell at anybody in the crowd or anything.
No, he was very happy coming off the field this week. Ray, what were your thoughts on the Eagles' win yesterday?
Very much like Mark's. I thought they would win. I thought they would win pretty easily. You knew Saquon Barkley for everything that he said all during the week about, this is just another game. And, it's a big game. It's in the division. It's the rivalry, blah, blah, blah. But we're just going up there to win. I mean, he said all the right things, but you knew deep inside, prideful athlete like him was going up there with something to prove. And, boy, he proved it. Once the Eagles, Mark talked about the fact that once again, they failed to score in the first quarter. But once they got it rolling, and Barkley's the guy that got it rolling, then it was really no contest. So they win 2 in a row, which has been a while since they've done that. And now we'll see what happens. I mean, they move on. And I know everybody in the city's celebrating, but I don't know if they realize the Eagles are underdogs going into Cincinnati. And the Bengals are right now, it's 2.5-point favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bengals, even though I know their record isn't that stellar, are following the normal Bengal path that they came stumbling out of the starting gate, lost a couple of games they probably shouldn't have lost. But now you can see them starting to get it together.
Yeah. Still have a prolific offense, too.
And, they got a great young quarterback, and their defense isn't great. In fact, their defense, to me, sets up a lot like the Giants' defense. They can't stop the run at all. So, I mean, yeah, the Eagles certainly – they can win this game, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as easy as yesterday.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk about defensively, because I think the Vic Fangio blueprint is starting to show its face here on the Eagles defense. Last week he blitzed more and he got to the quarterback. This year, a lot of the damage was done by the front. This week, a lot of the damage was done by the front four, which gives me some comfort. 8 sacks. You had Jalen Carter, Nakobe Dean with 2 apiece. Huff, Sweat, Nolan Smith, and Hunt each had a sack. Nakobe Dean, who I've been ripping a little bit on this podcast recently because of his lack of cover skills, is still a very active linebacker. He had 11 tackles this week, and he had 12 last week. So he's actually flying around and doing the job. Let's go around the room defensively. Mark, what'd you think about the Eagles' performance?
Oh, no, it was a great performance, but you got to weigh the Giants.
I was going to say, was it the Eagles' defense or the lack of offense?
A little bit
the
of
Giants?
both. Giants. Yeah. Ray had mentioned that the Bengals' defense isn't very good, and I agree. And I watched the bet for whatever reason. There's a lot of Cincinnati people down here, so the Bengals are talked about probably more than the Panthers, actually. But the Giants only scored 7 points against the Bengals. Giants can't score. They don't have a good player. Neighbors is going to be good, but he's been hurt. They don't have a good player on that offense. Their running backs are a bunch of guys.
Mm-hmm.
Their receivers are a bunch of guys. Daniel Jones stinks. I mean, he got benched in the fourth quarter for Drew Lock.
Yeah.
The Giants have no good players on offense. So, yeah, it was a great – I don't want to take away from the Eagles' defense, but, I mean, we could have got 11 guys out of the bar I was in. We could have played maybe stop the Giants' offense, I think.
Ray, what do you think? Do you obviously see a progression like I do that the Eagles' defense is now getting used to the Fangio system and playing better, correct?
I think that's part of it. I mean, you still got to remember, this is a team that gave up 445 yards to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers not all that long ago. So I'm not going to say that they've solved all their problems, but I think it. To your point, I think it's kind of what you said. I think they're now beginning to absorb and understand what Vic Fangio wants them to do. And I really think what you're really seeing, or at least what I'm really seeing, is the 2 young guys in the secondary are playing really good. Mm-hmm. And that makes a big difference. You look at the way that secondary played last year, you put Mitchell and Degene out there now. I mean, those are 2 very talented players. The likes of which they certainly didn't have last year. So then they now can match up better on the back end than they did last year. And I think week by week, as those young guys get some experience, they're just going to get better and better. But I thought it was very significant that on a day when you got 8 sacks, you didn't get any of them on a blitz. I mean, you got all of that pressure from the front 4. Mm-hmm. Now, you're not always going to go up against offensive lines that are as porous as the Giants' offensive lines, and the Eagles took advantage of that. But if they can get weeks like this, where they can get that kind of a rush out of the down 4 and then drop the 7 with some of the better personnel they have back there, then I think they're going to be much better on defense. And I think week by week, the more that Vic can understand what they can do, and they more fully understand what Vic wants them to do, I think it's a defense that will continue to get better.
This week will be a big test, right? I mean, not just Joe Burrow,
sure,
young quarterback, but they got Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and the kid from Princeton, whose name I can never pronounce right, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah,
that's some weapons. The Bengals have some weapons, so it'll be a good test for Mitchell and Degene.
I agree. Ray, I thought you brought up a really important point there, because when you have athletic guys like Mitchell and Degene now in the backfield, it opens up the defensive from a scheme standpoint where you can do more things. You don't have to play that soft Tampa 2 where, you're just playing positions on the field and hoping to guard against the big play. Now you can aggressively play some receivers in more of a man look and give the defense more to think about, because against Tampa, the middle of the field was wide open, and that was just a field day. Nobody could cover anybody. Nobody could tackle. But now when Degene is the factor, I think, because Mitchell's been starting all year long. You add a slot corner in there that can cover man-to-man. I just think it's really an important aspect to the defense.
Yeah, he's really good. They both are. I mean, I thought going into last year's draft, I mean, I do my own kind of draft analysis, stacking players, rating players, all that kind of stuff. And in last year's draft, I had Mitchell and Degene were my top two cornerbacks on my board. They were 1-2. And the Eagles came away with both of them, which I thought was an absolute coup. And you've already seen that Mitchell has really kind of nailed down the one corner, and he's really good. I mean, he's got some size, he's got some strength, he's physical, he's not afraid to come up and tackle. You can play him one-on-one pretty comfortably with most receivers, and he's, even as a rookie 6 games in, he's shown he's up to the challenge. And Degene, it's a shame that he had the hamstring injury that pretty much took away his summer camp. I mean, he was way behind going into the regular season.
Yeah, players really hate when you miss that summer camp. Players are very
well, but from a coach's standpoint, I think they had big plans for the kid, and they really couldn't implement them. Well, now you're kind of seeing it week by week, and he's so versatile. I mean, when the Eagles drafted him, I kind of projected him. Some people were talking about him as a border corner. I didn't see that. I think to me, I thought he was going to be just a pure safety. I think back there with his kind of speed and his kind of physicality, he could be a great safety. Mm-hmm. But Vic has decided now to put him in the slot, and he's proving that he can play in there. And also the fact he's up a little closer to the line of scrimmage, it gives Vic another option. If he wants to go to the blitz, he can blitz him out of the slot, and he's a good enough blitzer that he can get pressure on the pass.
Exactly. He did that a little bit last week. Let's talk about the star of the show, and that was Saquon Barkley yesterday. His return to Giant Stadium turned out to be a storybook return. 17 attempts, 176 yards rushing, averaged 10.4 yards per rush, a touchdown, broke a 55-yarder. And at the end of the game, when Nick Sirianni had a conversation about him going in and breaking a record, and you're going to have to remind me which record that was because I had it and then I lost it, Saquon's his response was, no, let the other guys eat, which I thought was a very high character thing to do in this day of age of athletes who only think about themselves. Mark,
yeah,
Ray,
absolutely. I was going to let Mark respond, but I'll jump in first. Yeah, I agree. The record they were talking about was a career high. Would have been Barkley's career high. What he finished with 176 is his second career high. He had one game bigger than that against Washington a couple years ago. So that's what they were talking about. Oh, hey, listen, you're just 3 carries away from your career high. And Barkley said, no, it's not that important. Let the other guys eat. I mean, it was a very smart thing for him it was a smart thing for Nick to ask, to give him the option, but in a 28-3 game, there was no point in him going out there and taking any more hits. So, I mean, he did the right thing. And the fact is, I mean, he handled this thing absolutely beautifully all week, all the attention, all the talk, all the speculation about chip on your shoulder, something to prove. I mean, he just sort of dismissed all that, said, look, we're just going up there to win a football game. We all know that it meant a lot to him personally, but you can't possibly handle or respond to a situation any better than he did this week. But I think it just shows the kind of pro that he is.
Yeah, I agree. Mark, we lost you there for a second. Glad you're back. We're talking about Saquon Barkley and his performance yesterday. You know, Jim Morris, I've said this on this podcast before, Jim Morris said something very profound years ago. He said, you can play championship football if you can run the ball and stop the run. I still think that's applicable in this day and age of all the fancy passing attacks. And the Eagles proved that yesterday. They held the Giants to 76 yards rushing, and we had over, I believe, 250 yards rushing. So what were your thoughts on the Saquon Barkley return to the Giants, Mark? I know you benefited from it personally.
Yeah, I did. I mentioned that to you before. I've never ever done that. I don't bet like.
He put a little Ray for you. He put a little prop wager in on Barkley's yards. We're very loose here. We're going with the flow. Since most teams are sponsored by Sportsbook, we figured, what the heck? Let's throw a couple dollars on.
Well, what happened? I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday morning, and he asked me what I thought about the game. I said, I think the Eagles are going to win going away. I thought they would cover the 3. And I said, I think Barkley's going to have a giant game. Pardon the pun, a giant game. I said, he's blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, you ought to bet on Barkley. I'm like, I don't usually do that kind of thing. He says, well, look it up. So, yeah, I bet that he would get over 100 yards and score a touchdown. And he did. I was laughing at halftime. But, Ray, I heard you said about players coming back. I'm trying to think of player like a lot of times it doesn't work. I remember when the Eagles traded LaShawn McCoy to the Bills, right? And then the Bills came back and played the Eagles, and it was a big, everybody wrote stories about McCoy coming back and this and that. And how McCoy was going to get he didn't do anything. He had like 40 yards, didn't score, and the Eagles crushed the Bills that day. I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. But a lot of times the other team says we're not going to let this guy beat us.
Right.
But I don't think the Giants were good enough to do that. And I think, like you said, Barkley's the kind of guy that he was going to have his day.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I'm sure that was the conversation in the Giants locker room. We're not going to let him go off here. We're not going to let him come up here and turn this into a one-man show, which, yeah, I mean, that was the plan, but they just weren't good enough. They just weren't good enough to deal with it. I'm just thinking as I'm watching Barkley break off. I mean, he had 3 runs longer than 35 yards. I mean, you don't see that in the NFL typically anymore, that guys have 3 runs that big. But I'm watching that whole game play out, and all I'm thinking is, is Joe Shane like cleaning out his office now, or is he just going to wait till tomorrow?
I think Mara might have done it for him. Mara might have done it for him already, right?
Yeah, I mean it's that. I mean, this would have been bad enough if we hadn't seen Hard Knocks,
right?
If we hadn't seen the actual conversation in Shane's office between the owner and the general manager about this whole decision, where you see the owner on camera say, I'm not going to sleep very well if Saquon Barkley goes to Philadelphia. And then follows it up as he's walking out the door. He stops and turns and says back to Shane and the other guys in the office, you do know that he is by far he's our most popular player by far. Mm-hmm. You do know that, right? Those are the final words of the owner as he walked out. Well, of course, he does go to Philadelphia, and then he comes back and has almost a career game against you. That was the death knell. That was the end. I mean, that's going to be the end, probably of the whole regime. If this team continues on this current trajectory, there's no way that Brian Dable survives. Well, he's an offensive coach on a team that can't score a touchdown.
That's unfortunate.
So he's got to go. And you would have to think just the Barkley decision alone is going to be the end of Joe Shane.
What do you think of Daboll overall as a coach? I actually kind of liked him. I liked him in Buffalo. I think he's a pretty good tactician. He just doesn't have the weapons this year to compete, and unfortunately, the coach has to pay for that. But.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I thought that when I saw the team in Buffalo, and look, Mark, you and I both talk. It really comes down to the players. It comes down to how good the players are. And obviously, Josh Allen is infinitely a better player than Daniel Jones. But the thing that I saw in that Buffalo offense when Dable was calling the plays was, boy, he could get guys open. I mean, you watch that Bills team. I mean, it seemed like Allen always had an open receiver. And it seemed like Dable had an ability to scheme guys open. And he developed Allen from a 50% passer in college, which is what he was. And a lot of people were a little skeptical about how good he was going to be. He brought him along to the point where he's now one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. So he can coach the position and he can scheme an offense, but he certainly needs better players than what he's dealing with up in the Meadowlands.
What do you think,
It's
Mark?
kind of crazy that the 2 best free agents so far we're almost halfway through the season, is Barkley on offense. Barkley's the best offensive free agent this past all season, right, going from the Giants to the Eagles. And I think the best defensive free agent is probably Xavier McKinney, who's in Green Bay now. Imagine they were both on the same team. Just let both of them go.
Great point. Hey,
so somebody's got to pay, right? Yeah.
While we're talking about coaches, Ray, I want you to comment on Nick Sirianni. I made the comment last week that I think win or lose, this is going to be Nick's last year. And I hate to say that because I think he's a good guy. I like him personally. I just don't think he shows the maturity that it takes to be the head coach of a National Football League team. Of course, you saw the incident with the barking at the fans last week. As a guy who's covered the Eagles forever, what are your thoughts on Sirianni?
Yeah, I agree. If you're the head coach, you can't be like this. You can't be up down. I mean, you got to be, because the players are looking at you for leadership. And the players can say what they, Nick says, oh, they want me to give that energy. They want me to be the old. No, they don't. No, they don't. They want you to be the coach. They want you to be the coach. Yeah. They want you to be the coach. And when times are tough, we want to know that we can look at you and you kind of got things under control. When I saw what happened last week, my reaction was, yeah, come on, will you please, really? I mean, you look at the great coaches, and I've been around them, for 50 years, Ken, like you said. Can you see Don Shula do that? See Joe Gibbs do that?
Tom Landry.
Tom Landry.
Those guys, right?
I mean, Parcells was as grumpy and cranky a guy you could ever be around. Yeah. But you never saw him do that.
Well, nobody was more emotional than Dick Vermeil, and he certainly never did it. Right?
No, wait, you guys are all mentioning Hall of Famers. Let's not compare. Ray Rose didn't do that. Rich Kotite, who we killed him for a million things. He never did stuff like this. He might have he may have bungled a play and did other things, but he didn't do this, right?
Right.
Have you ever seen anybody like this, Ray? You go back I said in all my years, I know I covered Marion and Buddy and Richie and Ray and Andy and Doug for a year. None of them ever did the stuff this guy does. Now you go back a little further. I can't imagine Mike McCormick did it.
No, he didn't. Jerry Williams. I mean, none of the guys I covered. I can't remember any of the guys I covered going up and getting in the face of the fans.
And he's done it more than once. He yelled at the Kansas City fans last year. Remember?
Well, opposing fans, no big deal to me.
But
I understand. I don't think it's right. But that the grievous sin here is yelling at the Philadelphia fans. You don't do that in this town.
Well, you also remember the first year when he went to Indianapolis.
Yeah,
and they're winning they're winning that game, and he starts with the fans about this is for Frank Reich. And,
right.
What are you doing?
Yeah,
what are you doing? And to me, it's just, again, you just look back at the great coaches. None of them would do it. I mean, listen, Shula walked off the field and got booed lots of times, but he didn't react to it. It's just noise. It's just noise, and to react to it and get caught up in it, and then have to answer for your own actions. You got enough other stuff to worry about without creating more problems for yourself. Yeah, and so that's now the apology the next day. I mean, it looked to me like it was. I think he was told to do that. It looked like a hostage video. He's sort of standing there like this, staring at it. And I think Jeffrey was standing on one side of him, and Howie was standing on the other.
He didn't let him have his kids on his lap either. He had to do it solo.
All he really had to do was just come in and say, "Hey, listen, guys, that was dumb what I did yesterday. It was stupid. I shouldn't have done it. But look, it's over with. It's done with. Come on, let's forget it and let's talk about football."
Yeah, I agree. We have a few minutes left. I want to mention Jalen Hurts here. Only 10 for 14 yesterday, 114 yards, one touchdown. More importantly, no turnovers by the Eagles. And I really believe that was a product of he didn't have to throw the ball, so he didn't throw the ball. The Eagles were so efficient with their ground game that he's got pedestrian numbers. But I thought overall he played pretty good football yesterday. Mark, we'll start with you. What do you think of Hurts' performance?
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, the big number is 0 turnovers. That's 2 games. That's 2 straight games now with 0 turnovers. If the Eagles don't turn the ball over, they're going to win a lot. The games they lost for a couple of reasons, but a lot of it was they turned the ball over too many times. Turnovers kill you. Yeah. No interceptions, no fumbles. Yeah, if you can get away with only throwing 14 times, I think every coach would sign up for that. If you could run for 269 yards, whatever it was, why risk throwing the ball, right?
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, and again, as Ray pointed out earlier, the Bengals, their run defense is not very good. So we might see Eagles try to do the same. Now they're going to have to score more. The Bengals are going to score some points next week.
Right.
So the game will probably end in a tie. Does Hurts know the tie rules? Because The last two times they played, I think.
I know.
I know the Bengals. The last two ties the Eagles have, I think, were both against Bengals, right? The McNabb tie a couple years ago, they had a tie.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
and then
McNabb,
the last, Richie's, right, exactly.
They've had two ties with the Bengals.
That's funny. No, I think what Mark said is true. I mean, if you don't have to throw, why bother? The fact that he only completed 10 passes, 114 yards, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on a day when you're running the ball the way you're running the ball, that's perfectly fine. And, Mark knows from knowing me, I mean, he knows that I love running the football. So to me, that was a real fun game to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look around the league now, more teams are running the ball. I mean, because of that cover 2 defense, because of the take away the big play philosophy,
it makes it easier.
The way to get teams out of the cover 2 is to run at the smaller box.
Yep.
And you look around the league, the top 5 offenses. This is very surprise you, Ken, and surprise you probably too more. Top 5 offenses coming into this past weekend in the NFL. In each case, those teams run the ball more than they pass the ball.
Really
top 5 offenses are all running the ball more than they're passing the ball. That's today's NFL, and you saw it in action with the Eagles yesterday.
So I didn't even tell you this, Mark, but I have a source inside the Eagles locker room. And Ray, if you recall last week against the Browns, the Eagles made 2 very curious calls in that game. The first one was at the end of the second quarter when they had a 3rd and 1 deep in Browns territory, and they chose to drop Hurts back. He got sacked, and then they had to kick a 57-yard field goal, and it got returned for a touchdown. The other odd play in that game was at the end of the game, the Browns had 1 timeout left inside the 2-minute warning, and they threw a bomb to A.J. Brown, which was caught at the 5-yard line and effectively ended the game. I thought they were both curious calls. Number one, the first one is you have the best short yardage play in the history of pro football. Why not use it there? And the second one is if they pick that end of the game pass off and run it back for a touchdown, the Eagles lose, and I'm not sure Sirianni makes it out of the locker room. Now, I'm told by my source that both of those plays were audibled by Jalen Hurts against the coach's advice. Hearing that news, what do you think about it? And if you recall, Hurts did the same thing against Seattle last year and got burned with that. So if that is true, what are your thoughts about the dynamic between Sirianni and Hurts and who's the boss and do they like each other and who's, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's funny you say that, Ken. I talked to some people this week too. I wasn't told it that bluntly that it was those 2 plays, but I was told that Hurts has the right. Like when everybody complains about Eagles never go over the middle. Why don't they throw over the middle? Because Hurts doesn't want to throw over it. Mm-hmm. Hurts has final say on the plays. So forget it. That's what a guy said to me. Everybody's arguing whether this is Kellen Moore's offense or Nick Sirianni's offense. He said it's Jalen Hurts' offense. Mm-hmm. So Hurts is who's the boss? Jalen Hurts, the guy making all the money. The guy that makes the most money is the boss, right?
Ray, would you agree that those were 2 curious calls, and what are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that very strange calls. But we've seen other ones this year too. I mean, they had a tush push play a couple games ago where they went away from it and tried to run
a fake tush push. Yeah,
Barkley wound up getting stopped.
Yep.
And then other times, with Nick passing up easy field goals to go for it on 4th down and getting stopped. I mean, just to me, silly stuff that.
We can't blame Hurts for those. We can't blame Hurts. He's not.
No. That's not on. It's not on him.
No,
but I think to your point, I think it is his offense. Mm-hmm. I think it is his offense, and I think that they have. When they gave him the contract, that power, if not in writing, was implicit. It was just okay. You're the guy, and. Nick's going to have head coach oversight. Kellen Moore is going to call the plays, but ultimately, if you want to change it, you change it. And if those were the decisions, audible to by the quarterback, then both coaches have to sit down with him and say, what were you thinking?
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
And I mean, they all have to have, there has to be some sort of a meeting of the minds here where they have to understand what the system is. Are you comfortable with the system as it is? And if you really are going to give that kind of power to the quarterback, which it seems they have, then you have to make him a smarter quarterback and not make those decisions in those big spots. Or ultimately, it's going to wind up costing you games.
Well, listen, the Eagles did it yesterday without Mulata, who they had to put on injured reserve for 4 weeks with his hamstring. Dallas Goedert was out yesterday. Calcaterra, I think, is filling in rather admirably for him. We lost Mekhi Becton yesterday. He was out in the second quarter with a concussion. Tyler Steen came in and looked like he played specifically well yesterday. But I tell you, Ray, I told you the half an hour goes quick, and it did. I really appreciate you being a part of the Bird Brains with Ken and Mark, and you have an open invitation. I know you got more time on your hands these days, so anytime you want to come back and talk Eagles football, we'd love to stare at those Emmys over your right and left shoulder. But it's been a pleasure talking Eagles football with you both, and we look forward to another great podcast, hopefully talking about an Eagles win at the Bengals next week. So for my partner, Mark Eckel, and our guest, Ray Didinger, this is Ken Dunek. Thanks for watching the Bird Brains with Ken and Mark, everybody, and we will see you next week. Take care.